Get analysis from our panel. Retired Vice Admiral Robert Harward is the former Deputy Commander of CENTCOM. He grew up in Iran and is now a member of the Iran Project with the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. Victoria Coates is the Vice President of National Security at the Heritage Foundation. She served once as Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump. And Kian Tajbakhsh is a former political prisoner in Iran. He is now an international relations professor at New York University. Great to have all of you. Victoria, I'm going to start with you. President Trump said the ceasefire is over, but we're not going back to full-out war. What does this mean? Where are we tonight?
Well, Elizabeth, great to see you. No, it's. I think we're in a kind of a liminal state, if you will, that the president has started hitting Iran again, hit them last night, hitting them more heavily tonight, trying to get them into a position where they're going to start to accept some of the United States' demands at the negotiating table. But the perhaps strongest thing that he's done was reverse the export license that he had provided for Iranian oil and petrochemicals overnight last night. That chokes off one of their last remaining sort of lines of foreign currency into the regime. And I think that's probably our most powerful tool at this point.
Yeah, he lifted those sanctions that had been on Iran for many, many years, enabling Iran to sell its oil on the free market at the market price, and as you point out accurately, in many different currencies. Kian, Trump has also said that negotiations with Iran will continue, but he says he thinks that, quote, they're wasting their time. It appears Trump thought that Iran would respond to the economic carrots that he dangled, the massive investment in the country, the billions of dollars in frozen funds that would come back, but Iran didn't bite.
Yeah, that's right, Elizabeth. Look, I think President Trump has a gut instinct which is correct, which is from the beginning that he doesn't feel that the Iranian regime is really a reputable, discussion partner or negotiation partner. That's why he comes out with these rather colorful statements, because I think that's what he really believes in his gut. This goes back to the 1980s when he actually, expressed very early his understanding that Iran must be confronted. However, I think that because of the ceasefire and because of the MOU, I think that President Trump has, in a sense, put himself in a bit of a disadvantage, because what the MOU has done is that has emboldened the regime to think that they found the weak spot of the United States, and that they're going to press as hard as they can to achieve a historic ambition, which is to control the Straits of Hormuz. Right. And I think that's why we see this back and forth.
Yeah, Admiral, Iran is hanging on tight to its control of the Strait. They put all sorts of rules in place that they will control who passes through, that people who pass through have to get their permission, perhaps now or in the future for sure, after the 60-day MOU expires, pay a toll, and then bombing ships that don't appear to follow their rules.
Elizabeth, good to be with you. And I have to agree with both of my colleagues here. This day was somewhat inevitable. I think the president took him a little ways to get there to realize Iran's going to take everything they can and give everything. Now, the good news in this strategy...
You mean give nothing?
And give nothing. That's exactly right. Excuse me. But the good news in this, the president, with this interim, he allowed Saudi, UAE, and to flow oil and get those ships that had been trapped in the Gulf. I think Saudi moved about 35 million barrels of oil, UAE about 25. The bad news was Iran got about 55 million barrels of oil out on the market, and they needed that money. So I agree. We need to go back. The president's already gone back to the financial strangulation. To me, that's at the top of the list. Don't just shut down the oil. Let's go everything else. Let's take out their airspace, not allow any planes. Let's talk to Pakistan, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. Hey, can we close those borders? Let's put the financial pressure on as well as this military pressure. And as we saw in Turkey, where the president's trying to build political pressure by reinforcing with Europe and the Arab Gulf nations and others who attended how important this is to them and how they need to be involved politically, financially, and even militarily at the end of the day.
Yeah, and the more missiles that Iran launches at Bahrain and Kuwait, as they did last night and have promised to do again tonight in response to the attacks that are happening right now by the U.S., the more unified that region is going to become against Iran. Victoria, the options now for President Trump, I guess, are either to endure this status quo that we are in or escalate the war. Both options have pretty drastic drawbacks. 87% of Americans polled say they do not want a prolonged war with Iran. One analyst said today this is going to be a long oscillation between Cold War and low-level hot war. Are we in a new normal right now?
Well, I might propose another option here, Elizabeth, which is that we're going to sort of sit back and watch the Iranians meltdown economically, as the Admiral and Kian both said. But at the same time, we're going to work on making the Strait of Hormuz an asset of diminishing return for the Iranians. We're going to help UAE build their pipeline around Fujairah. We're going to help Saudi Arabia build a natural gas pipeline across the peninsula to mirror Saudi Petroline. We're going to help Oman take control of their territorial waters. They have no interest in latching themselves to Iran. So I think we can actually just sort of bleed this situation dry for the Iranians while not really overcommitting the United States.
Kian, when questioned today about why he can't end the war with Iran, he was asked that direct question in a news conference at NATO. Trump said he has guaranteed that Iran won't get a nuclear weapon. He said they can't get to their enriched uranium because they don't have the heavy equipment to excavate it. But if that is true, why did we go to war in the first place? Because all that uranium was buried, he said, in our military strikes last summer.
Well, I think that if you go back to the outbreak of the war, I understood President Trump as having learned the lessons of the last 10 years. And that was to say, he went to Iran and said, you have to talk on three issues. And that is the nuclear enrichment, the ballistic missiles, and the regional proxies.
Yeah, but he's given up the last two issues already.
Exactly. That was a
and the one issue remaining, he said today, well, they can't get to it because they don't have the excavators to get to it. But that was true a year ago.
Well, yeah, but the trouble I think now is that we need verifiable mechanisms to be able to actually prove that that's the case. The Iranian regime has been very skillful in the past at both undertaking covert operations. We don't know exactly where the enrichment is, or I don't know. I'm sure the intelligence agencies may. But the MOU does not actually put in print a promise by the Iranians to not pursue a nuclear weapon. I mean, I think that, I think there's a bit of an ambiguity here. Somebody said that it says that it should be, Iran should maintain the status quo. My response to that is, the Iranian status quo is we will continue covertly trying to create a nuclear weapon. So I think there's too much ambiguity, and President Trump really needs to pin this down and really, either do it in words or do it in terms of military operations that bring the Iranians to a clear concession.
Okay. The MOU says Iran reaffirms what it's been saying and said in the Obama agreement, which is that it will not pursue a nuclear weapon. Everybody knows that they can say one thing and do another. There's nothing in there about making sure that, in fact, they stop doing that. Admiral, Trump called the Iranian leadership today, as you heard in our setup here, scum, liars, sick people, and cuckoo on it. What do you make of the current level of rhetoric?
Well, that rhetoric's been consistent. The president has changed his tone on the people, and I think at the end of the day, he's talking about the government, the regime. again, he went in part of this in response to the Iranian people. He knows they're suffering. They're being held hostage by the IRGC, which is basically the controlling mechanism inside Iran that dictates to the political leaders like the prime minister, the Ayatollahs and others what's going to be. They control the power. And he's clearly identified and understands the difference between them and the Iranian people. So I think his message needs to be more precise and reinforced with the Iranian people, as I do with texts I receive from all my friends in Iran telling me, go get them. We're glad you're back. Let's get this done. So differentiating would help, but he's accurate with the government. The IRGC has been murderous thugs. They lie, they manipulate, they do anything else to gain concessions without getting any. And I think the president's come to that realization, and we're going to have to use all economics of all the elements of power to change that dynamic.
Yeah. Pretty much the same song, same tune out of this Iranian leadership that we have seen now for years. Might be different faces and names calling the shots. We actually don't even know. You would think the new Ayatollah would have shown up at his father's funeral over the last 6 days, but we still haven't seen hide nor hair of him or heard his voice. Vice Admiral Robert Harward, Victoria Coates, and Kian Tajbaksh, thank you all three.